Welcome back to the podcast. For this episode, we're doing something a little bit different that I think anglers and also instructors are going to find really, really interesting. I'm thrilled to be joined by Will Shaw and Mark Surtees, who are going to talk about fishing, but we're also going to look at the instructing process and some of the things that they've touched on that I think are really, really interesting and too good not to share. So, gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to the podcast. Mark, first off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as by way of introduction, please?
Well, I'm a master casting instructor with the FFI. I'm a regular instructor with the British Fly Casting Club. I started fishing when I was about 6 or 7 years old. My grandfather taught me. I fished rivers in the northwest with him, and I fished lakes in Ireland with my uncle, who went on holiday as a young man and never came back because he enjoyed the fishing so much. And I got into instruction because my hand was falling apart. And I'd lurked around on the back alleys of Sexy Loops for a little while, and eventually went on there to ask if anybody had experienced the same thing. And I found an overwhelming wave of support, and my instruction career began right there.
That sounds a really lovely story. Will, I know we've had you on the podcast before, and I bumped into you at the Tweed Festival as well. So welcome back. Can you tell and remind listeners a little bit about your story as well before we get into the nuts and bolts of everything?
Yeah, sure. So a bit like Mark, I started fishing when I was about 8. My dad fished, my brother fishes, so it's a bit of a theme for the family. And I fish for anything really, if it's got fins. So I've got a strong coarse fishing background. I've done a lot of sea fishing. And really from, I guess, mid-90s onwards, really kind of got into my fly fishing. And I moved to Scotland in 2006. And I decided my kind of way into instructing was I decided I wanted to get really good at it. I thought, this is my thing, my passion. I just want to get good at it. And it seemed like a good idea to, take some kind of challenge on. So I'm qualified with SGAIC, Scottish Game Angling Instructors, FFI, Certified Instructor, and AAPGAI, Advanced in single-handed. I've double-handed in SGAIC as well. And the funny thing was, what started out as a kind of a thing to just get better at casting, I actually really found I loved the instruction. That, it's as good as fishing. I really love teaching people and meeting new people. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I do now. Yeah.
It's an interesting story because I often hear people saying, I wanted to get a little bit better and improve myself and challenge myself. But it is quite interesting how it takes people in a slightly different direction. And then they discover the teaching process and then become deeply entrenched in it. And it strikes me that the two of you are that way. And also you enjoy questioning the process as well. Would that be correct, Mark?
Well, I'm not sure questioning is quite the right way. Is that you question yourself, Pete? So when I first started out, my experience wasn't great, and so some of the early lessons that I have were what I would now consider to be a train wreck. And so, if you're worried about your own self-esteem in any way, you try and find out whether or not there's ways to improve what it is that you're trying to do, which is to teach somebody to make basic loops. And so I was very lucky with the people that I had around me at work and that I could access socially, who began to point me at texts and practices that were used in other disciplines. And when I started reading that, I realized there was a mismatch between what I was doing and what everybody else was doing. And that's really what started me off. And I know Will was doing it at the same time because we spoke way back about this, probably going back to 2007, 2008.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I can remember having, I can't remember where it was. Maybe one of the Sexy Leaps gatherings, having that realization that there were people feeling the same as me, in that, I was doing all the stuff that was in the FFI exam or in the AAPGAI exam, all the demonstrating and teaching and stuff like that. But it was very kind of hit and miss. Sometimes it would land, sometimes it wouldn't. And sometimes you'd have a complete miss, a complete disconnection. To reinforce what Mark's saying, you come away from some lessons thinking, I don't know what I was doing there, and wondering why, why is this not working? Why does it work with some people and not work with others? And exactly the same with Mark. That kind of set me off reading and finding out, well, what are other people doing? Because what was then the standard approach, it kind of worked, but I felt it could have been better. And I think for me, two big books that I read that really got me going. One was The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim Galway. And the other one was Coaching for Performance by John Whitmore. And they really kind of reframed the way I started to think about teaching and getting people to learn, for want of a better phrase, motor skills. One of the things I did, so I just read In a Game of Tennis, which was all about awareness and not about traditional, tell them to do this and they'll do it kind of thing. And I was doing a club day up in Edinburgh for some fly fishers. It was about maybe 10, 15 people. And I thought, right, I'm going to go into this day, and it was an afternoon, and I'm going to try not to give one piece of direct instruction. All afternoon, I'm not going to tell anyone what to do. All I'm going to do is ask them to look at things and notice things. And it was amazing, Pete. Those moments when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, because suddenly, I was getting results just by asking people to look in the right place and notice the right things. And that kind of sent me off on a massive rabbit hole. And Mark will know this. We've sent each other reading materials and science papers and stuff like that, because I thought I just need to know more about this and understand, what other sports are doing. That's kind of what set me off. Yeah.
Because it strikes me a little bit that, and I know we talked about, Will, when you were on previously, The Inner Game of Tennis, because it was a fascinating read. And it seemed as though, certainly in our world of fly fishing, that we appeared to be behind the curve. And you guys have subsequently picked that up and sorted it out a little bit. But, when I started, whenever it was, early 2000s, that you did a certain thing a certain way. And it was only then that towards the end, the last 3 or 4 years of me doing tuition, really, that I realized you've got to really think about this a little bit more deeply on a different level, in the sense of, right, you've got somebody for the day. And the way that we worked was that very often we'd have people who had never picked up a fly rod before. We had to teach them to cast. We had to teach them to wade. We had to teach them to fish, and fish an upstream dry or a duo or whatever that may be in a day. And what was really important to me was that they left the day being able to fish, not they had a day's experience of fishing so that they could continue fishing after that day. But I soon discovered that we would sit down and I'd start at the day with a cup of coffee and make it, again, these sorts of things that are not too formal. So it's not like a classroom type experience. They feel relaxed, because that's one of the main things, isn't it? That when people come to a lesson, they're a little bit nervous, aren't they? That they think, right, well, they're more worried about making a mistake, aren't they?
Definitely.
They're prepared for hours of perpetual torture. And one of the things that we have a responsibility to do as instructors is to try and make that as less painful as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the issues that we would have had with direct instruction, which is the way that we were brought up to teach it, is that it creates this rather sort of professorial position for the instructor and a less than collaborative position for the caster. And there is a conflict almost right from the very beginning, particularly with adults who prefer a collaborative environment than one which is just a straight instruction environment. And just that helps to calm people down. But adding a bit of humour and a light touch at the beginning makes a massive difference to a lesson. And giving people permission to fail. It's not all about just constantly identifying and correcting error. In fact, the less we do of that, the better off we are, because it creates a positive kind of environment for them to learn in. So I don't dwell too much on people cocking it up. I'm much happier when I see them win.
I agree. And I think your point about making them feel at ease, Mark, and admitting that we all make mistakes, which I think doesn't come across in kind of general discussion. We all like to put across this facade, really, that we all make brilliant casts all the time. We never get stuck in trees and we never get tangles, and we all know that that's not true. The best casters in the world cock up, and I think getting that across to learners that it's okay and that's actually a way you're going to learn. It helps relax them and makes them much more open to listening and seeing things, I think.
I agree 100%. And it felt to me when we were sitting down with people, it dawned on me that, you're starting the day pretty much with a blank canvas. So why fill that blank canvas with a load of text about, right, we have different lengths of rod, we have different profiles of fly line. And it dawned on me that was taking away from the potential early on, because it always seemed to me that what would happen is that the first few things you told them, they would hang on to the most. So why fill it with stuff that's ancillary that you can probably add slightly later when you're on the river? Have you discovered those sorts of things as well?
Well, we're going to get a bit techie now, I think, Pete. So what we know is that there are limits on everybody's working memory. We have to remember the system isn't just a rod and a line and a fish and the environment. It's got a human being at the end of it. And we've known for 70 or 80 years that the way that we process information is limited by our working memory. It's the short-term memory before we get everything settled down into longer-term procedural memory. And so if you overload this part of your brain, or you start to pump in information in a way which is just too fast for somebody to process, bits of it get randomly dumped. So because the brain's going, whoa, crikey, there's a avalanche of stuff coming. And the brain has no idea which bits are the most important, which bits aren't. So we have to filter that. And we manage the pace of the inputs by constantly monitoring what the caster is doing. And you come back to Will's questioning here, which is constantly making sure that you're not overloading the person in front of you. You can see their eyes go full, and that's it. Then you've lost it.
And I think it's really tempting, especially when you're a newly qualified instructor, where you're filled with all this knowledge to the brim that you want to demonstrate and you want to show how much you know. And I've done it. I can't remember how many times I've done it, where you just want to get all this knowledge out onto them. And Mark's right. You can actually see them starting to glaze over. You can see the words bouncing off their forehead. It's not going in at all. But it's so tempting to do because you know so much that you want to say, and you have to learn to back off and focus on what's important. Big skill, I think, for an instructor is just focusing on the thing that's important in that moment.
There is another issue, and that is that we process information, so information about things, in a different way to the way that we process motion. It doesn't function in quite the same way. And so the more information we put in, the less space there is for processing the actual motions that we're trying to get people to do. And it's a act of great disciplinary demand to just try and cut down the amount of stuff that you're giving people to try and learn.
Mm. Yeah.
It's a discipline I've never really got a hold of, to be perfectly honest.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Will, because I was going to bring that up, and it was immediately my cogs were turning when you said about, I used to call it new instructoritis, and it was, I'd see it quite often, and almost people teaching as if they were taking, their pupil was taking the exam themselves. Do you think, though, that does come with experience, and over time you understand that, and that is, like you say, it's just a function of wanting to share knowledge, albeit in a positive way, but just a little bit too much? Because I've been away recently and somebody said, oh, they went to a thing and it was a guy, I can't even remember the chap's name, I wouldn't say anyway, but they said it was incredibly technical. And that struck, I said, oh, really? And I'm thinking, well, you know, that doesn't always help. It does hinder. And I guess we're drilling down to what you guys are getting to, isn't it?
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, Pete, that currently the only way you learn is by experience. And that's because there's nothing else out there. And I help run the SKIAC course. We train instructors over the winter, every winter, so we have a cohort of instructors that we train. And what we're trying to do in that course is shortcut that experience. So, you know, we'll take them through the conversations that we're having. You know, that it's not about offloading a load of information onto the learner. It's about noticing. It's about picking the thing that's really important in the moment. The issue we've got, and I think why I think both Mark and I have been keen to do these podcasts, is that generally this kind of stuff isn't available to instructors. So the only way you learn, the only way that I've learned, Mark's learned, and you've learned, Pete, is by you get out there and do it. And when it doesn't quite work, you try and change it and do something different. And I think, you know, the stuff that Mark and I have learned and are interested in is stuff that all instructors should be interested in, especially kind of newly qualified ones who've got all the great skills and massive technical knowledge. You know, they get even better much more quickly by picking up on some of the stuff that we're going to talk about, I guess.
Do you think that is a function of our pastime? And I'm coming to terms with this, and I'm okay with it, that our pastime is just a small one. So there hasn't we do what we had always done, but now we've got a framework that you guys have worked on that allows us to look at things in a slightly less traditional and a more modern delivery.
Mark, have you got a view on that?
I'm mulling over what you've just said about it being a small one, Pete. For the individuals that are looking to learn, it isn't small. For most of us who are at the obsessive end of the programme, it's a big part of our reason to be. It's part of our lives. It's a mechanism that we use for all sorts of relaxation purposes that it's very difficult to explain how important it is. So small it may well be in terms of the number of practitioners, but in terms of the individual, it's a big deal. And so if we're instructing, or my personal feeling is if we're instructing, I need to respect the importance that has in the life of the person in front of me, and do the best I can to make sure that what they want is something I'm able to deliver for them. And it's a responsibility I personally I take as seriously as I can. With respect to the traditional methods, there isn't anything that Will or I or anybody else who's interested in this is looking at that isn't probably 40 or 50 years old. These aren't modern. These methodologies have been used in other sporting disciplines for decades. And really, the issue, as Will has rightly pointed out, is that instructors are perfectly happy to look and read this kind of thing if it's available to them. And part of the problem that we've got is that it isn't easily available. You really have to go rummaging around to find it, and finding a coherent structure where it all fits together is quite tricky. It's taken us 20 years.
Mm. Yeah.
And we're still not any good at it.
Yeah. And I think, and I know Mark says this a lot, is that we're not special. Fly fishing isn't special. It's funny, there's a group of people that, an online group that I'm part of for coaching with Rob Gray, who's written some great books on motor skills. And they're not from mainstream sports. They're taekwondo. They're, lots of the kind of martial artsy kind of stuff. And they're all going down the same path. We're not a kind of a unique special sport, and it's totally different the way we teach fly fishing from basketball or from football. It's the same stuff going on. And that's been the fascinating thing for me is you talk to these coaches from 5 or 6 different sports. There was like one of the guys was a circus performer, and the same issues in terms of trying to get coach motor skills. So we're not special, and so we should be looking at other sports and other disciplines to see what's best practice, I think.
Some nice points there. And what I was getting at, apologies if it wasn't clear enough, was that we are a small pastime by numbers. And so there hadn't really been a need to, the coaching aspect of it had been as it had always been. And it was like you've identified, Will and Mark, that there are people in similar, because you often look at golf, don't you? And there are similarities. Would that probably be a relatively close one to start with in the movements, et cetera, the stroke, et cetera, that have made you think, oh, actually, there are some similarities there. And then that gets you thinking in a slightly new dynamic direction. And from what you've been uncovering, and you've said the ability for people to access what you've been writing about, what you've been talking about, do you think there is an openness from organizations to want that, not just in fly fishing, but beyond that too?
I think it's a mixed bag, depending on who you talk to, Pete. And I think so. I think the first thing that I want to say is that I think often when you start talking about new ways and different ways of teaching people and instructing, people take it as a criticism of what they're doing, and they say, they take it as if we're saying everything you're doing now is wrong, which is patently not the case. There are hundreds of fantastic instructors out there who get great results. And you were saying, Pete, they've been doing it for years. They've got amazing experience. And carry on doing that. But for me, the opportunity is you can get even better. Yeah. So it's not a question of stop what you're doing. Everything you've learned in the last 20 years is complete rubbish. That's not the case. This is wow. You can actually get there quicker and do things better, and enjoy it more yourself as an instructor. And I think so. I've got great respect and good friends in all the organisations, all the casting organisations, and I think they're all trying really hard to do a good job. Running these organisations is not easy. And they're all doing it voluntarily. No one's being paid to do this stuff. And I think given the time and, hopefully if people like Mark and I keep banging on about this stuff enough, I think they do want to get on board and understand this area and how to get better at teaching. It's not you're not going to wave magic wands and transform everything overnight. But so I think the intention is there. It's practically difficult. I think that's kind of why Mark and I are kind of keen to get stuff out there and make information available, because we'd like to make it easier for FFI candidates and for AAPGAI candidates and for Gaia candidates and SGAIA candidates to access information. For me, that's the thing, is let's just get this information talked about and out there.
Mark, anything to add?
Well, I agree with Will. I think Will is leading out here anyway. So as far as I know, SGAIA is the only organisation which is actively promoting this as part of their training programme. And I think for some of certainly the organisation that I'm in, although I don't speak for them, there is a vast portfolio. There's a huge resource of pre-existing documentation, hints, tips, practices that go back a long way. And some of it, it's so complicated to rewrite it all in view of new information that, given the fact that they're all volunteer organisations, the task is just too big. So for me, Will's done remarkable stuff with his programme. But for me, it's really just trying to make some additional resource available, particularly to new instructors, to say, read these books, Google this kind of topic, explore these issues that come in golf, for example, in tennis, in basketball, in football and rugby. All of these things that we are talking about exist in those disciplines. And have a look at it, read it. And of course, we're set back to a certain degree by the junk that you get on YouTube and people who are genuinely trying to help, but in fact don't even have the mechanics right, let alone the teaching methodologies right. So it's very difficult, I think, to beat a way through that. But the organisations, generally speaking, they're doing their best. Could they do better? For sure.
Yeah. We all could, yeah.
And it's interesting, Mark, what you say about, because we live in a world, don't we, where the likes of YouTube and other stuff is out there and people want to create content which is well-intentioned, yet makes the whole process a little bit more complex and points people sometimes in the wrong direction. I will say as well that I had people latterly that were turning up and I would joke and say, well, you're not one of these undercover people who's trying to check me out. And they said, no, we saw something on YouTube and that really helped me make a cast, which is really encouraging from that point of view. But the problem is it's almost information overflow now, isn't it?
Well, I had a guy on Saturday morning who was an avid YouTube watcher. And about halfway through the session that we were doing, he announced that he'd seen somebody who shall remain nameless on YouTube explain that this was the thing to do, which was pretty much the opposite of what I was wanting him to do. And so every now and again, you do come up against these kind of issues where you have to take a breath and go, okay, well, how do I deal with countering this position without just plain out telling the guy he's wrong? Because that's going to, you're going to end up in a conflict situation that you don't want to get into. And personally, I'd prefer it if somebody came for a lesson and just blacked out YouTube for 2 or 3 weeks before they arrive. It would suit me fine. It does make life tricky on occasion.
Yeah, it does. I agree. I think there's an interesting point that I think that occurs to me, and I think you alluded to it a bit earlier, Pete, when you were talking about guiding, and that I think isn't kind of well understood in fly fishing instruction circles. And this is it's about the objective of a session, what you're trying to get out of any session. And there's a difference between something that we would call performance, so we're going to coach for performance, or we're going to coach for learning. And I think what you said, Pete, was when you were guiding, you'd like people to go away having learnt something, because then they can reuse it. Yeah. The problem with coaching for performance, which I think is the kind of traditional way of teaching, not just in fly casting but in most things, is if I stand on your shoulder behind you when you're casting and just keep telling you what to do every 2 seconds, I could probably talk you into a good fly cast in that moment. I can get you to get the fly to the fish. Left a bit, right a bit, up a bit, little more power, a little less power. I can talk you into it. But you haven't learnt anything. As soon as I disappear down the river, your casting is going to fall apart again. And I think what instructors can do, and I've heard it said, is like, well, I fixed them in the lesson. They turned up, they had a problem, I fixed it. The end of the lesson, they were double hauling or they were doing whatever, I fixed it. Now, either they won't see that person again, so they don't know whether they did fix it or not, or whether they just talked them into it in that moment. Or what I've had happen to me is they come back a month later and they patently haven't learned anything because we're right back to square one. So that's my problem. That's my mistake. I thought I'd taught it them, but I didn't. Because what I did was I was just coaching in the moment to get them to cast in that moment. And I wasn't worried about them learning anything. Whereas where I am now is actually in a lesson, I'm more relaxed if they're not like throwing razor loops, and casting 30 yards. I'm much happier if I can see they're absorbing what it is they're learning and they've got something that they can take away and practice. And that's a much more valuable lesson, I think. Now, if I was guiding, I think the emphasis might be a bit more towards performance because I need them to catch a fish on the day. And I think that there might be a slightly different mix, and no lesson is going to be 100% one way or the other. I'm still going to want to see them improve a bit in the lesson. But I'm more concerned about them having learned stuff than actually performing in the moment. If I was guiding, it might be a slightly different mix. But I think that difference between performance and learning is not well understood. And it allows us to convince ourselves that there's no problem and that we've just done a great job, because I can coach you to performance in 2 hours, whether or not you've learned anything. And I think that for me is a big thing that I'd like to get across to instructors, if that makes sense. I hope.
It makes really good sense. And can you add anything to that, Mark? About, I think it's a really interesting thing. And one of the terms I used to use with the guys who helped me was self-discovery. Is that something that chimes in with how you're looking at things too?
Yes. So we know that, again, talking about adults, we know that adults learn best by exploring solutions to problems for themselves. Going back to direct, indirect instruction, you can give people hints as to how they might do that. But really the learning happens when they solve it for themselves. And so we're in the business of creating problems for casters to solve themselves. That doesn't mean to say that we go silent and let them get on with it. They're not going to do that. And that mix between direct and indirect instruction is called guided discovery, which is basically what we do. And how much of the direct and indirect you mix up depends on the skills and experience of the caster that you've got in front of you. So there's going to be much more help and hints to a beginner than there would be for somebody who's an intermediate or an advanced caster. But just for example, but Will's absolutely right. But more to the point, there are activities that we do to promote performance, which will actively prevent learning from happening. And there are occasions where the activities that we need or the methodologies that we need to use to promote learning will be disruptive of performance. So it would take longer for somebody to reach a performance objective with certain types of learning or certain types of teaching methodologies than it would be if we just, crank them up and tell them how to do it. It is a big deal, I think, is understanding that difference. It is a real big deal for instructors to get into their heads that sometimes fast isn't fixed.
Yeah. I like that. I'm going to nick that saying, Mark.
I just made it up.
It's fantastic. I'm writing it down.
That's a really, really interesting point, isn't it? Because, like you say, sometimes it's about the lesson, but it's so much more. And this is, I guess, where you're getting to, isn't it? That, that was a really great lesson, but who's that a great lesson for? That's the important thing, isn't it? It's not a great lesson because somebody was double hauling in 10 minutes. It's whether they walk away with that. And that is the important thing, I think, is that somebody is able to come and see you guys and then understand what it actually is. Is there something, advice that you could give instructors about that, on the sense of being able to say, right, okay, they're doing this really well, but how do you reinforce it, if that's the right word, so that it's ingrained with them, that they are walking away with that skill rather than having a taster of the skill?
Well, I think the magic happens outside of the lessons. Is that the real learning happens when individuals go out and practice, and the difficulty I think we've probably all faced is we might only see somebody once. We don't know if they've practiced. We don't actually know whether or not they've learned anything at all in a single lesson. And then the only option we've got is a bit of a gamble, is to use techniques that we know are going to promote it without ever knowing whether or not we've achieved anything or not. A few years ago, I started only really booking multiple blocks of lessons. And the reason for that is twofold. Is that, first of all, I didn't know whether I was doing it right or not, or whether I was getting results or not. But also it places a little bit of pressure on the caster when they're coming back to have done some independent work before they do come back for the second or third or fourth lesson. And that's really worked, because it you can only do so much in terms of promoting improvements in the lesson, but what you're really doing is packaging up practice routines that they can take away, and that's where they'll really succeed, I think.
I agree. I think the one of the big pitfalls that I fall into a lot is, I do it in lessons and when we're doing the course as well for instructors, is you can finish a demonstration or something and you can say, have you got that? Do you understand that? No one in the world says no. Everyone will nod. It's much better if at the end of a lesson you can ask them questions. And you're not putting them on the spot. It can just be friendly little kind of challenges to, so if you're in this situation, what would you do? If you see a tailing loop, what are you going to do about it? What's the big thing you're going to take away from today? That's, at least in that moment, you can confirm, has it sunk in? Have you got your points across? Rather than just going, is everything fine? And is it okay? And I think we need to get better at asking questions, really. We could all do that.
I think there's that will, and we need to be better at observing the caster. Reading the caster is really important. You can see people getting frustrated. You can see when they're battling it a little bit, and it's down to us to mediate then.
Yeah. It's really interesting when we're training instructors on the course. So we do quite a lot of practical work with them out on the bank. So someone will be casting and the other instructors will then be kind of saying what they've seen. And the first session on the course, it's like they've all got blindfolds on. They are not trained to see the things that experienced instructors see. Just something as simple as, can you see the loop? What was the loop like? And these are kind of experienced anglers who want to be instructors. So a beginner, they have no clue what the loop they just cast looks like and where it went and how it landed. And for me, that's the one of the biggest things, both for beginner casters, for any caster really, is just get more attention on what you're doing. You know, what did that loop look like? Could you draw it? You know, that kind of thing. And if you're an aspiring instructor, your observation skills are going to have to go up like tenfold. And I think that, you know, if there was one thing I would say to an aspiring instructor, you've got to get good at noticing. It's the best thing you can do. The single one thing that you can do.
Because
if you, sorry, go on, Mark.
I agree with that. I also think that how we communicate, the way that we approach a lesson is important too. I tried wearing pastel shirts and things like that, but it didn't really work. Is how we communicate is really, really important. How are we going to put people at ease? It's as if they're coming for a dental appointment. They know that work has to be done, but they're waiting for the drill to start. and so you have to find a way of relaxing or creating a relaxed learning environment, because that helps them learn too. So having a bit of fun with it, you know, just the odd random bit of nonsense helps to break the ice a little bit and calm things down. They're going to be tense and slightly anxious right at the beginning, and we have to work on that. And that is also about noticing. Do you notice it, and what are you going to do when you see it?
Massively.
Yeah. That's got me thinking about, you know, actually the instructor looking at themselves, because, you know, you guys are clearly natural instructors and understand it, but not everyone is. And their ability to engage with people, to communicate with people, is on various different levels, isn't it? So it may be challenging for them, despite being an instructor, to actually be able to do that. And you said some of the things about the pupil being nervous. And, you know, again, the guys who work with me, I taught them to read basic body language so they could see those sorts of things, to get them to pop down the rod for 10 minutes, go and have a look at the river, explain about the river, break everything into smaller, easy to digest sections that made that process, so they could build that confidence between each bit, from the basic pick up and lay it down to a full cast or whatever that may be. But it's interesting that even instructors have to understand how to read those signals, how to read those signs, and actually being able to interpret them as well. And that's a big onus as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's massive, because it's not. I can't speak to Mark, but I am not a natural instructor, and I don't think we are. I don't think anyone is. And we've all tripped up on this stuff. You know, we've all had our disaster lessons and missed things, and it's something that you have to. You need to be aware of it, that it's something that you need to get good at, and then you need to find a way of practicing it, just like a caster would. I think, especially, I guess, for a lot of people from the fishing fraternity, you know, we're not necessarily all massively gregarious and experienced in presenting and social and stuff like that. So different people have got different challenges. But I think what we can do is give them the skills of, you know, going back to this thing about being able to notice A, what's going on with the cast, and B, what's going on with the pupil. If you're not noticing things, what have you got? All you've got is a set of practiced lectures that you can give, that you can spray out at random and hope some of it sticks. Yeah. But if you're noticing what's going on in the cast and what's going on with the learner, you can do something about it and you can respond to it, and then you're going to get a good lesson. So that, for me, is why it's so crucial.
I think there's also another issue, Pete, and that is that, particularly beginners, but anybody who is learning new things, and particularly if it's motor skills, there are neurological responses that we're conditioned to deliver which have been studied for a very long time as well, and they can be easily confused with anxiety or nerves, whereas in fact they're perfectly normal. And so, if you're not aware of these things, you can end up trying to fix a cognitive behavioral, neurological response to this learning process, which is unfixable, and you're going to waste hours if you're not aware that this is just normal behavior that you have to ride. And very often, those kinds of triggered behaviors can be dealt with by managing the atmosphere in your lesson, and by manipulating the kind of drills that you're asking somebody to do to help them improve articulation, for example. There's all sorts of things that we can do when we see it. If you don't see it and you don't know it's there, then you're going to misinterpret this activity that the caster really probably has very little control over.
Where do you guys stand on the engineer versus poet, and how does that come into the teaching process? Do you have any thoughts or views on that, Mark?
Yeah. It's rubbish.
Right.
It's meaningless. And it's linked, I think, with some of the old theories on learning styles or learning preferences and people's learning preferences, for which there isn't a single shred of evidence to support it. And so people learn to move in very similar ways, whether their profession is poetic or otherwise. And that is backed up and supported by about 150 years worth of research. So it plays no part whatsoever in my instruction, none.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and it comes from Mel Krieger, who was like fantastic. I mean, one of the first casting books I read was, I think, Essence of Fly Casting. Brilliant book, beautiful photography, and he was all about engineers and poets. What I take away from this is, so I'm always puzzled when something like that gains traction. Why is it that gained traction? And I think it's because sometimes you can say something in one way to one person and it won't sink in, and you say it in another way and it suddenly sinks in. And I think that happens. Sometimes you just have to use a slightly different analogy or form of words, or you show them and it sinks in. And so I don't believe there are natural engineers and natural poets. I believe that we're probably all a big mix of that. And at different times of day and different states of emotion, to pick up Mark's point, some things are going to go in quicker than others. And our job as an instructor is to find that route in. So my first carefully crafted analogy might not work. So I'm going to go in a different way. What I'm not going to do is try and find out if they're an engineer or a poet beforehand. Because I think that way is not going to yield results for me.
Nicely put. And that's the skill, again, of an instructor, isn't it? Noticing how people learn and what they're discovering while you're showing them the way through, isn't it? That's a skill in itself. But I wondered, we're sort of pushing on really well. And for listeners, I hope you're enjoying this as much as me. And this is only the first. We're going to do a series of these as well that I hope you're going to find as interesting as the very first one. But for people listening, generally speaking, we have beginners listen to this podcast, but also we have intermediate and experienced anglers. At this time of year, we're starting to think about what is to come for this season. And you said about packaging something up. I know it's very difficult to do because we're doing it over the airwaves, but is there something that you should think, we'll start with you, Will, actually, something that people should take away and be thinking about for the coming season for their practice regime, perhaps?
Yeah. So number one, practice. Just get out there. Don't wait until the first day of the season. Get out there with the kit that you're going to use If it's standing on a field or in a river or somewhere, just have a practice to get those muscles going again. My other main thing is, so that is definitely by far the number one. If you're a trout fisherman and it's overhead casting, I would say one thing you can Google on YouTube is Lee Cummings' triangle method. And I would Google that, have a look at it, and have a go, and see if that sharpens up your loops and tightens up your loops. It's really worth a good look. And that you'll see is all about where your attention is and what are you trying to do. So those would be my two.
Mark?
I would recommend that you do exactly as Will has described. And your focus of attention should be on the loop. And try and vary what you do with your practice so that you're not just standing out wherever it is that you stand out. Repeat. It's, can I form a narrow loop? Can I form a wide loop? Can I change my trajectory? Can I change the plane of my casting and still maintain the loops? Because what we really need to do is to make sure that when we practice with a clear objective to improve something. There's no point just standing out there and doing the same old thing. It's try and get better at something. Pick something to get better at. And that's really the long and the short of it for me, I think.
And Mark, for instructors, because there might be people out there who are just taking an exam, have just taken one. There might be experienced ones in January. Now we're into February now as well, but is a time where perhaps the phone is starting to ring just a little bit more and people want to come along. What do you think are some basic skills for instructors to be thinking about for the coming year?
Blimey. Well, I mean, there are obviously both Will and I do a fair amount of instructor mentoring, and at this particular time of the year, people are starting to realise that the assessments are coming up summertime or springtime, and so they put in a lot of work. It's hard to know how to advise that, Pete, because it's a tricky path for everybody who's starting out on it, and they don't really know how difficult it's going to be until they've started. Actually, it's quite a good way of explaining how difficult it is for people to improve their casting. So, if you've got a recreational angler coming for one lesson, they're not going to get that much out of it. You bear in mind that it takes a casting instructor 9 months minimum to get to the point where they're able to take a basic instructor exam. So what would I say to them? I said, get ready for a lot of hard work. Certainly when I was doing it, I was assisted by the local drug dealers who used to sell Knox capsules down by the old pavilion. And occasionally, as I was ranting on my own in the middle of a rugby pitch, the members of the Bowls Club would come out and bring me a cup of coffee. And so that's what I would suggest they get prepared for.
And how about you, Will? Because I was also thinking about, let's look at it from a slightly more experienced instructor point of view, that somebody wants to take things on just perhaps a little bit further, or improve and make the lessons more enjoyable for their pupil, and, communication skills, noticing skills. Is there anything people could be, because you've got me thinking about it. I'm thinking, right, sometimes when I watch people play golf, and I can't stand golf. I really can't stand it. But I love watching professionals play golf because it's such an amazing and beautiful thing to watch. I still don't understand a sport that you walk around and one bad shank and the game's over pretty much. But when you see a professional playing it, that it's such a beautiful thing, the swing, everything from the short game to the long game, those sorts of things. And I watch that sometimes and think, geez, that's amazing to be able to see, and you can see that fluidity, you can see the skill, those sorts of things. Is there anything that can translate? We can talk about tennis, we can talk about lots of things, but are there things that people could watch that may not be fly casting related that may help them pick up on their game? It's a bit of a fastball, that one, so apologies, but wondered if there's anything people can take from that. And it may be that Mark wants to, let's use a golf analogy, chip in with this afterwards as well.
It's difficult to pick something that they can watch. I think, I alluded to The Inner Game of Tennis, and the same guy wrote a book called The Inner Game of Golf, which are brilliant. And there's loads of stuff that is translatable into fly casting and fly fishing in there. And they're entertaining. I would say they're slightly dated. They're 1970s books, but they're a good read. They're not big books either. You get through them in a day. And I think, like you though, I'm just like you, Pete. I wouldn't pick up a golf club if you paid me, but I love to watch the great people. I would say if you can watch good casters, or just spend time watching any casters and make your own mind up about what you're seeing. Get good at looking at loops, and then try and work out why that loop is like it is. And for me, that's a good start point. Is just start watching things, and try and make your own mind up. Have a view about what's going on, and it's a great way of learning, I think.
Mark, anything?
Well, I also agree you should watch things, but if you're going to do it on YouTube, do it with the sound off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, that's been a wonderful insight into what you guys have been working on. And as I said, we are going to go on to this into a little bit more depth in further podcasts. I hope everyone has enjoyed listening to this. I think this is a really interesting debate that can provoke experienced people and perhaps not so experienced people to think about this a little bit more. And the crux of it for me is quite simple, that, if you can get your fly from A to B efficiently, then I think your fishing's going to probably go up a few notches as well by practice, by listening to people like Will and Mark and lots of other wonderful instructors around the world that will get something from it. So practice, enjoy that practice. My only humble advice I'd add on is don't rip a load of line off the reel when you go and do some casting practice. Keep it manageable, keep it at fishing distances. But I think this has been a really enlightening, interesting and entertaining chat that I'm looking forward to the next episode of it as well when that comes along. But I'd like to thank you for that. I'm going to throw you the fastball, which is the usual podcast question. You're going to give me a song that you may be going fishing. It may be that you are going to do some instruction and you've got a song to get you in the mood for it. Mark, give me a song for the listeners to dial in on.
Okay, well, in the spirit of the investigations that we've all had to go through, I would recommend "A Life" by Slowdive.
Blimey,
that's
shoegaze.
Yeah, that's far too cool for me. So I'm going to have to look that one up in a minute. And Will, how about you?
So I'm just having a massive panic because I've forgotten the title of the song that I was going to recommend. So I'm just Googling it as we speak. Hang on.
I didn't know you were going to ask that question, Pete. I would have had a long list.
If it's any consolation, neither did I.
Right. I've got one. Okay. So it's a song called Correspondences, and it's by someone called Laurie Torres. Torres. Lovely piece of music, very relaxing to get you into the mood.
Fantastic. Gents, thank you so much. First off, if people, because I'm assuming instructors are going to want to speak with you. I think flycasters, who are learning their trade might want to speak to you. So how do they find you, Mark? What are your contact details, socials, those sorts of things? How can people find you?
Well, I won't give you the old work email, but I can't quite remember the new one. So you could try mark at flycasting with a hyphen.com.
That's a nice, easy one. And Will, over to you.
I've got a website called lineslinger.com. So if you hop on there, and you've got my contact details there.
Absolutely fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming along to talk with me today. It's been enlightening. It's been fascinating. Looking forward to the next one. And thank you for sharing something that you want everyone to be part of. I think that's really important that you want to do that as well. And kudos to both of you for wanting to do that. So on behalf of people listening, thank you. And thank you for being a guest on the podcast today.
Thank you. It's been great.
Welcome.
Really enjoyed it.
Well, everyone, this has been another episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've got tons out of this as well. And it's lovely to be able to take the podcast in so many different directions that we can keep evolving it, make it interesting for you so that we learn something along the way as well. As ever, there'll never be any charge for these. It's just wonderful to be able to speak to people like Will and Mark, and for them to be able to share their expertise and knowledge with us. So I think fly fishing's all the better for it. But thank you so much for listening. There'll be some more coming very, very soon.
Thanks for listening to the Fly Culture Podcast, brought to you in association with the Voice of Game Angling, Trout and Salmon, where Pete is the editor.